I recently took on a job to plant a couple flowering crabapple trees, so I thought I would share with you my process and the steps I take when planting trees. I'm Kevin, by the way, coming to you from the Northern Great Plains Zone 4. Now you can certainly use a wheelbarrow to hold the soil that you'll be digging out, but more often now I like to use an old sheet of plywood or paneling. This is a 4 by 4 foot sheet and it's perfect for a tree this size. Using a board like this speeds up the process and it just takes less energy since you can avoid lifting the soil up into the wheelbarrow and then lifting it back out. I find it really speeds up the process, having that soil at the same level and so close to the hole. I like to have a few different shovels on hand when I plant trees. First up here is a flat spade, also referred to as a nursery spade. I use this to get a nice clean edge against the sod that we'll be removing. This is a stainless steel shovel I've had for quite some time now. I'm not even sure what brand this is, but stainless steel is certainly not necessary and they're actually not all that common in the tool trade. I'll put a few links in the description box for similar style shovels to this and a couple other shovels I'll be using today. I used the tree container as a guide for this first step, and once I get all the way around, I'll cut the sod into smaller pieces, making them lighter and easier to manage. I discard all the sod chunks and do not use any of them for backfill. Next, I like to use a shovel with a sawtooth edge to loosen the soil. This type of shovel is primarily used for projects when you have a lot of roots to cut through, and they're fantastic for that. But they're also great for penetrating hard or compact soils. Luckily for me today, this soil is quite loose and has good soil moisture, making the digging easy. So I really wouldn't need to use this shovel here, but it's just become a habit in my process. I will mention that this sawtooth shovel shows no mercy to underground utility lines, especially irrigation water lines. Whether or not you use a shovel like this, it's always important to have your utility lines marked by locating services to avoid costly repairs or dangerous situations if gas and electric lines are in the area. Okay, now that the sod's removed, I switch over to my round point shovel and start excavating. Now you'll often find information on planting trees recommending that the hole should be twice as large as the root ball. And that might be good advice if you're dealing with poor soils like hard clay or rocky soils where you may have to amend the soil. But this is a really good loamy clay soil and it'll be really easy for the roots to start establishing themselves into this new ground right next to the root ball. So my hole here only needs to be large enough to easily turn and adjust the root ball so I can get the trunk straight and adjust for planting depth. Okay, container grown trees. The greatest thing about container grown trees is you can plant throughout the growing season when they're leafed out and actively growing. With excellent results, I might add. Compared to bare root trees which are dormant, that leaves you with a shorter window for planting in early spring or late fall. But there are some disadvantages to container grow trees, and the first one's a root-bound situation that can occur inside the container. Root-bound trees can eventually lead to a root girdling problem where the tree roots continue to grow in a circular pattern, and eventually, well, they strangle themselves. Here's an example of a root-bound tree in a different project where I was planting some linden trees. I had to spend quite a bit of time cutting and severing the roots on the sides of these root balls. On severe root-bound trees, you might be better to wait until the tree is dormant so you can really cut apart those spiraling roots. Our root ball here on our crabapple is in good shape, but I'll still do some light chopping to get those roots broken away from the sides. So what I do when shopping for trees is I'll actually a lot of times pull the trees out of the container at the nursery. If you have a mass of roots where there's no longer any visible soil, you could potentially have a future problem, as well as taking a lot of extra time for this process. By and large, it's just best to avoid trees that have a severe root-bound problem. After getting the tree in the hole, I usually step back to see if the trunk is mostly straight, as well as checking to see if I'm close on the proper planting depth. And that's the second disadvantage of container-grown trees. They can often be planted too deep in the container. And when trees are planted too deep in the ground, it can often shorten their lifespan due to crown rot or, here again, self-girdling problems. So not only do I look for root-bound problems when picking out trees, I'm also looking for tree trunks that are showing an increase in diameter or flare at the soil level. The top lateral root should be just below this flare area, and that's what you're shooting for. You want to plant your trees with that flare or top lateral root just above the soil level. And to avoid planting too deep, I always try to avoid over-excavating or going deeper than the height of the root ball. If you over-excavate and have to add a lot of loose soil back into the hole, there's a good chance your soil will settle or sink, and subsequently your tree settling in deeper than it should be as well. If you look closely, not only is this tree starting to flare where that trunk and soil meet, I also have the top of the root ball about 2 to 3 inches higher here than the ground level. And then when I'm finalizing the backfilling process, I'll usually chop down some of the surface roots on top of this root ball. At this point, I usually add a little bit of soil to keep the tree upright and straight, and then I take out one more strip of sod. The reason I wait to take out this additional sod is when I'm digging the hole, I don't want to over-excavate. Had I removed the sod back to this diameter from the beginning, I end up taking the hole a lot wider than I need to. Taking out that little extra turf grass now also reduces competition for moisture for our new tree as it establishes. I also mix in fertilizer as I go as I'm backfilling. My favorite fertilizer for planting is Osmocote Plus. It's a good slow-release brand with the necessary major macronutrients and many of the micronutrients that benefit plants. Before I start the staking process, I usually add the first round of water. That way, as I'm working, the water will begin to soak in and start to settle some of that loose soil. I'll likely add about 3 5-gallon pails over the next 15 minutes as I'm staking the tree. And then usually I have to add just a little bit of extra soil. Since I live in a windy area, staking trees like this is pretty standard and recommended. Staking trees not only keeps that tree trunk straight, but it keeps the root ball from moving so those tender new roots aren't dislodged or pulled out. Since I'm fairly protected here by the buildings and some other large trees, I'm only using 2 stakes, but you could certainly use 3 depending on your situation. And for the finishing touches, I like to add some fresh mulch to help keep moisture in the soil as well as keeping weeds down. Even though this lawn is irrigated and there is good soil moisture, it'll still be necessary to water this tree probably 2 to 3 times a week, adding around 5 gallons each time. The amount of water needed after planting can vary widely depending on your situation, and some trees may need watering twice a day for several weeks depending on the species and soil type. When watering container-grown nursery stock, then the goal is to keep that root ball fully hydrated for the next 3 to 4 weeks without creating a saturated or mucky situation, as trees also need oxygen and airspace. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you again next video.